The voice of sharing Durian ASEAN.
ASEAN Dailies. First and the foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Hi, this is Arlene and you're listening to ASEAN Daily, where we bring you all the latest updates from Southeast Asia. We are going to start off with our ASEAN Daily on the politics and current affairs in South. Hi, welcome back. So, Singapore court will be hearing its first case related to government's 1MDB probe. A criminal motion will take place this Friday on February the 5th between banker Yak Yew Chi and Attorney General's chambers. This time, Jolo is named as part of the money laundering scheme. So what we are seeing right now is the Supreme Court will be hearing its first legal case arising from the Singapore government's probe into the bank accounts, possibly linked to the Malaysian state fund of the One Malaysian Sdn Bhd or 1MDB Development Berhad, And Singapore authorities announced on Monday the seizure of a large number of bank accounts in relation to the debt-ridden 1MDB. Both the Commercial Affairs Department and the Monetary Authority of Singapore, they said that they have been actively investigating possible money laundering and other offences carried out in Singapore since mid-2015. Banker Yak Yew Chi, the applicants for the criminal motion, is understood to be seeking access to his bank accounts, which were frozen during said investigations. He is said to be employed by wealthy Malaysian financier, none other than Joe Low, or his name as Low Teck Joe. Joe Low, who has reportedly been involved in personal transactions with the 1MDB, and having Mr. Yak represented by Mr. Roderick Edward Martin from Martin and Partners in the Singapore Supreme Court later this week. Singapore police declined to reveal if Mr. Yak is in remand. Another update on the news about the Malaysian 1MDB scandal is Singapore said it will not tolerate being used as a refuge for illicit funds. It was established in 2009 to pay for a major new economy and social development in Malaysia. In a joint statement by its central bank and the Police Anti-Fraud Agency, it said in connection with these investigations, they have sought and are continuing to seek information from several financial institutions, are interviewing various individuals, and have seized a large number of bank accounts. Singapore is also cooperating closely with relevant authorities, including those in Malaysia, Switzerland, and US. Last year, officials in Singapore froze 2 bank accounts as part of its investigation. The announcement followed news that around $4 billion earmarked for investment in economy and social development projects in Malaysia may have been misappropriated from state-owned companies. Switzerland's Attorney General said that there were serious indications that funds have been misappropriated from Malaysia's state companies. So, will it make the Malaysian Prime Minister image to the world worsened? Will it worsen the Malaysian Prime Minister image to the world? But there's one of the questions that we can't really answer right now, because some of the money, the office of Michael Lauber said, has been transferred to Swiss account held by Malaysian former public officials current and former public officials from the UAE. To date, however, the Malaysian companies concerned have made no comments on the losses they believe to have incurred. And besides that, regulators in the US and Hong Kong are also reported investigating the 1MDB scandal. Allegation about the 1MDB definitely had hit hard on the Prime Minister Najib Razak's image when it comes to transparency and good governance. But it's a bit too soon to speculate whether he is directly involved. Although the fund's advisor board is chaired by Prime Minister Najib Razak, who launched the 1MDB soon after taking office in 2009. And we move on to another news. No returning back the reform clock for Vietnam. Well, new Vietnam leader to prepare for TPP and economic reforms. As we all know, last week was a dramatic week-long power struggle in the country where politics is normally carefully scripted, but it seems like the future of Vietnam is a very tough one, and they need to choose a leader that can prepare or propel Vietnam to economic prosperity, in this case, reforming its policies. And Mr. Nguyen Phu Trong will remain as the Communist Party General Secretary, the country's supreme leader post. Vietnam definitely will be a big player in TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, and also the economic reforms that would definitely propel Vietnam into all the different free trade agreements such as RCEP, AEC, and many more. Regarding on the party Congress message in Vietnam, they need to continue to prepare for the TPP and they need to speed up the economic reform. Some ruminate that the ascentry of the more conservative, historically pro-China, Mr. Trong, who has frequently butted head with Mr. Dong, could lead to lessening support for market opening reforms, with worrisome implication for the Trans-Pacific Partnership ratification and a cooling of the recently strengthening US-Vietnam ties. These concerns are misplaced. It is no longer accurate to paint Vietnam's leadership as riven by deep division over ideology or economic development approaches. There is little evidence that there is meaningful dissent about the country's direction among the senior ranks of the country's leadership. The party is keenly and broadly aware that it needs to continue delivering high growth rates and rising prosperity if it is to forestall rising domestic dissent and challenges to its authority. The reasons for the sudden fall of the fortunes of Mr. Dong are subject to good deal of social media gossip, definitely. A credible theory for his political demise center on Vietnam's elite historic aversion to leadership. With Mr. Dong in the dominant General Secretary role and protege as Prime Minister, he would have been able to operate largely free of checks and balances that have been an integral part of Vietnam's leadership structure in the past. Few in the elite would be keen to experience a local version of the anti-corruption house cleaning China's powerful President Xi Jinping have been undertaking in Beijing. Well, although Vietnam was the best performing ASEAN economy last year, posting a growth rate of 6.6%, there was a little sense of complacency at the party's conclave. The Congress approved Vietnam 2016 to 2020 economic blueprint, which calls for more reforms to create favorable conditions to support the private sector, including a level playing field with equal access to credit, land, and other resources. The blueprint targets an average annual 6.7% GDP growth and an increase of GDP per capita to $3,750 by 2020, a height of 83% from 2014 levels. Furthermore, the party communique was filled with unusually clear and critical language of the need to do more to combat corruption, to open democratic space, but not to the extent of threatening parties' monopolistic hold of power. Maybe they can look at Singapore or any countries in Southeast Asia for some lessons on how to run a dictator government that is still very much provide some sort of democratic space. Just being sarcastic here. Anyway, last news of today's politics and current affairs news. Thailand will be intensifying crackdowns on abuses in seafood industry. Well, we all know that modern slavery in the seafood industry has been quite an issue globally, and governments continue to crack down on all the slavery all the slaves mostly from Myanmar that is being used in its seafood industry. Thailand, which faces possible trade sanctions over abuses in its seafood industry, says it has accelerated its fight against human trafficking and unregulated fishing. Deputy National Police Chief Thamasak Wicharaya said that in the 8 months since a task force was set up to combat fishing industry abuses, it has investigated 36 cases, arrested 102 suspects, and rescued 130 presumed trafficking victims. In the 16 months prior to that, only 15 cases were investigated. Unfortunately, that's a far cry. Not even 10% of the cases that were reported, and we all know that the unreported ones were probably 10 times more than the number that we know. Traffic victims in the fishing industry sometimes work in slave-like condition. The EU has warned Thailand, that the world's third largest exporters of seafood, that its seafood may be banned if it fails to institute effective measures against unregulated fishing, while the US has called for stronger measure against human trafficking. It has put Thailand on the blacklist of countries that fail to meet the minimum standards in combating trafficking, but has opted for now not to impose sanction on its long-time ally. Well, I guess it's time to put on it if nothing is changed. Anyway, that's all from our news on our political and current affairs section. We will continue in a bit later for our social, cultural and trends in Southeast Asia.